to What You Don't Know with Dr. Daly. We are here at Mount St. Mary's College discussing Roe versus Wade. And what we're going to do is analyze a short essay on the topic of Roe versus Wade. And what is the title of the topic we'll be analyzing?
Debunking the myths of Roe versus Wade.
So yes, and that's precisely what we will be doing, is debunking the myths around Roe versus Wade. So several of the students have analyzed this piece and written essays on it, while other students have come up with different issues that they want to bring up around this topic, Roe versus Wade. So what we want to do is, instead of focusing on being a pro-life or pro-choice, instead of being Democrat or Republican, what we want to do is just look at this issue and discuss the complexities and see what we come up with. Okay, so yes, and tell us your name.
Oh, I'm Julie. And about Roe versus Wade, I found out that it does have a fallacy about it where it's black or white, either you're pro-life or pro-abortion. And I feel like there should be a middle ground towards it. If people feel like supporting it for a certain situation, then they should have that option.
Okay, so the idea is that you're either for it or against it, and that there should be some other option. And how would we go about creating some other option? Do you think the idea would be this, and we're going to get to this later in the discussion, is that Roe versus Wade may not be the only way to protect a woman's choice. And that's one of the things that we're interested in having this discussion. What if Roe versus Wade were turned over? Would all of the women in the United States lose their choice? No, what would happen?
Well, that is one of the issues that comes up in the article, is if they were to overturn Roe versus Wade, then most likely what would happen is the power would go to the states. Each individual state would have their own say in, yes, you have the right to have an abortion, or no, you cannot.
I think just kind of recapping all that kind of fits under the slippery slope fallacy, whereas they think if they were to overturn it, they just kind of jump to the conclusion that everyone's going to end up not having an abortion, or everyone will, according to the states that choose to do so.
Right, and then women will end up in back alleys and doing all kinds of horrible things, right, because they don't have the choice, which absolutely is a slippery slope, because in fact it would revert to the states. So we would not lose our option. And what was interesting about that is that by having this misunderstanding about Roe versus Wade, that sort of really threw the election in a certain way, because we knew that one of the candidates was going to not overturn Roe versus Wade, and the other one was. And I don't remember any kind of conversation saying, well, it would revert to the states, so we'd be okay. That didn't come up. So what we want to do in this conversation is bring out these kinds of truths. You should go first. And please say your name.
So I'm Kay, and I think that slippery slope of it going to they'll be in the back alleys. Also, a lot of women feel like if they take away my right to have an abortion, maybe in the future I'm not going to have the right to have certain health care or the right to vote. Like, they feel that it's just going to slowly progress into I'm not going to have any rights at all. And I think what happens when candidates are like, oh, I'm for it and I'm against it, comes back to the idea that the terms pro-life and pro-choice make it very black and white, which there's other ways to talk about Roe versus Wade and, say I am pro-choice, but that doesn't mean that somebody that's pro-life is against choice, or that somebody that's, pro-choice is against life. I think that it is all starting with how we're labeling people.
And I also noticed the slippery slope of when it talked about the power going to the states, the article alluded to the fact that the last time the states were deciding such a huge controversial issue resulted in the Civil War. So it kind of made it seem like, oh, if we leave it up to the states, we're going to have a civil war, which would not be the case.
Right, yes, probably not. Yeah, that is quite a slippery slope. If it's overturned, we'll be in a civil war in the United States. Yeah, that's excellent. That is an excellent point.
Another fallacy that I found in the recent election was appeal to authority. It doesn't look like many people went beyond what the politicians were saying about abortion, like they were about Roe versus Wade. They really didn't do their own research to see whether what they were saying was true or false. So I think the politicians really used that fallacy, like, oh, if you vote for me, this is going to happen, and if you don't vote for me, this will happen in return. So I think there was much of that, and I think that's something that's really affecting society right now.
Yes, and how is it affecting society?
Just because people just are so dependent on what politicians are saying that they don't really find themselves researching it on their own.
Right, and it really seems like the issue of Roe versus Wade, everyone, there's just this bandwagon fallacy. And what's a fallacy? A false argument, right? So it sounds good, it's convincing, but when you look into it, there's something wrong. So it's a false argument.
Also with the whole fallacy thing, like I also read an article on Huffington Post, and the writer was saying how we should vote for Obama because Romney would overturn the Roe versus Wade and whatnot, and then he was explaining how if Romney does win and if it does get overturned, like pregnant women with money will try to find like qualified doctors who can secretly perform illegal abortions, and saying how some women who can't afford it will go to places like maybe Mexico or places where they can find abortion cheaper, like saying that, you know, all these bad things would happen if Roe versus Wade was overturned and things like that.
Right, and as it turns out, that's just entirely false. It would have fallen onto the states, kind of like the situation that we have with gay marriage, right?
Yeah, that's a state decision. But I also thought it was interesting that it kind of became this fallacy argument that if you were for overturning Roe versus Wade, you were somehow anti-woman. Like that made you just hate all women. Like, do you really think that every politician who wanted to overturn that just hated women? Like, that seemed silly to me, because if it was overturned, it would just go to the states, and the states would be able to vote on the issue and therefore customize it towards what people wanted.
Right, exactly right. And yeah, so the way it was presented to the people too, I think further, was that the good people and, you know, the virtuous people would be for upholding it, and the not so virtuous people would not. That seemed to be a looming kind of idea going on Facebook and in the news, and right? Which again is yet another fallacy.
I thought there's a paragraph in the article itself saying that sounds a little biased to me from the point of view of the author. His name is Gary Bauer, and it sounded to me as if he was pro-life himself, because it says that if Roe versus Wade were to be overturned, post-America would look a lot different, and we would no longer teach young Americans that there is also a right to take the life of an unborn baby. So I thought that sounded a little biased to me, and it sounds like he's attacking.
I also wanted to say something about how she mentioned that there is a bias, because when I was reading the article I also felt the same thing, and so I did some research on Bauer, and I found out he was actually a famous spokesman for pro-life, pro-family, and pro-growth values. So it basically made me think that he obviously has an interest while writing the article, that he wants people to think, oh, Roe versus Wade should be overturned, and he's trying to convince his reader to go on his side as well.
Yes, and I think that's really interesting. So he has a position, he has an interest that he wants to convey, and at the same, does it follow from that, however, that the myths that he's debunking are unworthy or uninteresting? I mean, do we still, even if we don't side with him, do we still get something of value from this essay?
Yeah, I believe so, because he's not only looking at the ones that, oh, this will happen if it gets overturned, and also this, so you should help overturn it, but he also he does look at it from different points of view as well.
Right, so I think that that's maybe one of the interesting things about it. Even if you don't change your mind about your position and don't join him with his position, it still nonetheless is useful to really understand what the controversy around Roe versus Wade. And yet, of course, you want to always factor in, as you have, that he is a position, right? So would someone who was a liberal Democrat approach debunking Roe versus Wade differently?
Yes.
Maybe so. And we'll have to look around and see if anyone has, but it really wouldn't serve them so well to do that, would it? Why wouldn't it serve them well?
Why wouldn't it serve them to present
Write
an
it.
article?
Yeah,
Because then it turns other people off. That's like, I'm not gonna read your article because I know that you're trying to persuade me to. But I feel like you have to. It has to be like a middle ground. You can't, like, you can write an article, but if you're wanting it to appeal to everybody, you can't be so one-sided.
right. And but why would a liberal Democrat not want to debunk the myths of Roe versus Wade?
Because then it might turn people away from Roe versus Wade and want them to overturn it, because a lot of people are for Roe versus Wade because they don't understand what happens if it's overturned.
Right, so the interesting thing is, of course, you're not going to have a liberal Democrat debunking the myths because they use that as a platform to, talk about the values of their party's position. Yeah.
I think, as you were saying that, what is it that you take from the article, even though it's biased, I think we've all made the point that he made it very clear that most Americans don't really have a clear understanding of what Roe versus Wade is. And it made me want to think, like, what steps can be taken to educate America on this, because it is a very crucial topic and it is a very hot topic in the news and what's going on politically. So I was just wondering, what steps do politicians or educators believe is possible in order to educate America on this?
Well, I mean, not so much, because so many people have an interest, and that's why I think it's crucial to talk about this in a philosophy course, because my interest, and since I'm heading this up, is in the truth, not a specific position. So where else in the world we'd have these kind of discussions, I don't know, because very often if someone's teaching a course, they'll have a position, and that does come out. And not that that's necessarily wrong, but where we can really talk about these kinds of things, I don't know. I want to turn the question back to you, because I don't really find a place for it. I mean, I know even in my own academic circles, women are so strongly, convinced that we should keep Roe versus Wade, and they don't understand why it looks like it's even unconstitutional, and that, that in fact what we really need to do is protect our right to choose in a different way. And I don't know that women are afraid of this, but I don't think they understand the issues. I think it's sorely misunderstood. As to why that is, I don't know.
Well, according to the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment, the government must protect your life, liberty, and property of the citizens of the United States. And the exact definition of liberty is the state of being free within society from oppressive restrictions imposed by authority on one ways of life. So I think he's just basically questioning whether his liberty is freedom, and do we have right to our own privacy? I personally think that should be involved with our liberty. Like, other people shouldn't be able to choose what we do in our own lives.
Right. But then I guess one of the questions is why would the right to choose an abortion or not be written into liberty? How come being able to drink, for instance, is not written? How come we don't put gay marriage in there? Right? So why is this question about abortion fit the 14th Amendment when there are tons of freedoms that, how can we assure them? And why this one? I think that's part of the question, right? And that was well done, thank you.
To me, it's on interpretation, because people are saying the babies inside the womb can be citizens, they're living. So how do you know this doesn't apply to them, saying they have the right to liberty and everything? So it just depends on again, the definition of when life starts.
That's right, exactly right. And so are we actually dealing with the mother now, or the child, or the fetus? Whose rights are we dealing with? That's another huge question, right? Because we think we're giving rights to mothers. Now all of a sudden we're dealing with rights to children, or babies, or fetuses, or zygotes. If Roe versus Wade were overturned, we don't know what would happen, but it would in fact revert to the states, and so women wouldn't just lose the right to choose. I think that's the misunderstanding looming, right? That's what fueled our last election, was the thought that by overturning Roe versus Wade, you lose the right to choose, and that's not true necessarily. Right? Okay, good.
Because
Yes.
people were voting by thinking that it all depended on the president, by
Right.
whether they had the right to an abortion or not. But at the end of the day, the president can only do so much, and then it falls to the state.
Right, right. So it's quite clear that this was just not known.
Yeah.
And I don't think the people who were participating in the election wanted it to be known. And the Republican conservatives didn't want it to be known because they were writing on a platform
Yeah.
that they needed it to be overturned. And the Democrats and the liberal Democrats didn't want it to be known because they were writing on that too. So we can see why this information didn't come out, because it wasn't in the best interest of the people. What we want to talk about is the truth, so that we can decide as individuals what's in the best interest for ourselves as the people.